Okay, so today we're going to talk about Chapter 1 from the textbook. It is Why Study Birds. Um, and there are three things that you should be able to do at the end of this chapter. Most importantly, you should be able to answer the question that is proposed by the chapter title, Why Study Birds. Second, you should have the ability to list some specific examples that support some of the concepts related to that question. And then finally, you should be able to take the discussion that we have here right now, combine it with the reading from uh, week one, the scientific article that you'll see on Canvas, and then develop your own reasoning for why you personally think you should study birds. So let's jump right in. Let's look at different examples and different reasons for studying birds. So let's start out with talking about the distribution of birds in a general sense. Basically, birds are found everywhere on the planet, which is a good reason to study them because it's not like they're only found in one little place. You can go anywhere and birds are there. And so some examples of this, on the top left you have snow buntings. They are found in the northern Arctic tundra. This is an incredibly harsh environment, incredibly cold environment, and yet there they are and they're thriving. Um, on the opposite end of the globe, you have things like Adelie penguins. So that top middle picture is the Adelie penguin, and it's found in Antarctica, around ice packs and in the ocean, and just in very harsh conditions, very cold conditions. Um, and so there you have two different birds on opposite ends of the globe that are present in places you would think very few things should live. In the top right, that's a resplendent quetzal. This is a bird of the cloud forests of Central America, and is this is a completely different type of situation. It lives in these high humidity, high elevation cloud forests. Totally different from the situation that you have with things like the snow bunting and the Adelie penguin. Here, something more familiar to you might be that our deciduous friend, the red-bellied woodpecker, right? This is a eastern North American deciduous forest bird. And so it's another example of the idea that you have all this diversity and it can be found in these different places. The bird in the bottom middle is another bird that's found in very harsh conditions in places that you might not think birds should be, and it is a pharaoh eagle owl, which is found in the northern desert regions of Africa and Saudi Arabia. So, if you were to go to those deserts, you would say like, I can't believe that there are a lot of birds that roam these brutal parts of the world, but they do. And then finally, another species that might be more familiar to you. Uh, this is a species of western parts of North America, is the western meadowlark, which is a grassland species. So species that you find in big agricultural fields and in natural grasslands. All of these species are just a tiny glimpse at the incredible diversity of birds that stretches across the globe and are found in virtually every place on the globe and in virtually every habitat you can imagine. So birds are everywhere. Another reason, if the fact that birds are virtually every place on the planet isn't a good enough reason for you to want to study birds, another good reason to do so is that birds play really important roles within their environment. That is their ecological niche, and this could be these examples are going to be related to the way birds feed, so what they eat. Um, but it can also be things like how the bird interacts with the other organisms. It's the ecological niche is just um, what role the organism plays in its environment. And in this case, we're interested in the bird. So let's take a look first at an example of a keel-billed toucan. So a keel-billed toucan is a very good example of a seed disperser. And what it does is it eats fruit, and that fruit, of course, gets digested, and inside the fruit is a seed. Well, that seed will be released when the bird defecates somewhere. So typically what happens is the bird lands on a tree, it eats a fruit, flies away, and then it releases the seed somewhere else. That seed gets deposited at a great distance from the original tree. And in this way, a tree is capable of dispersing its young away from the base of the tree itself. This is important for all sorts of reasons. For one, that means that a parent tree doesn't compete with its offspring for sunlight, as an example. So you imagine a tall tree, if it dropped its babies right at its base, and those young trees are trying to grow, well, the big tree, the parent tree, is going to be shading the little trees, which for those little trees then is going to make it very hard to grow. That's just an example of why seed dispersal is so important. There are several reasons for that. Another example would be something like Anna's hummingbird on the top right. These are important pollinators. So particularly important pollinators of tubular flowers. Hummingbirds tend to pollinate very tubular shaped flowers. They're designed to pollinate those types of flowers. And so, right, the hummingbird visits the flower. It wants to get nectar out of the flower. And in the process of doing so, pollen will be transferred onto its beak or onto its face. And then when it goes to visit another flower, it will transfer that pollen to the other flower. And pollen is just a packet of male gametes. It's a packet of plant sperm. That's what pollen is. So what they are doing is acting as an intermediate in the process of plant reproduction. On the bottom right, on the bottom, well, we can do the bottom right first, it doesn't matter. On the bottom right, we have a peregrine falcon. Well, peregrine falcons are big predatory raptors, and of course, that plays an important role of moving energy up the food chain, right? They take down smaller animals, consume those animals, that moves that energy up the food chain. And on the bottom left, we have a king vulture. So king vultures, just like you think of vultures around here, king vultures tear open carcasses and eat carcasses. The act of them tearing into a carcass is a very important part of the process of the breakdown of a carcass and the recycling of that material into other organisms. And so what they do is when they tear open that carcass, they're creating a doorway into the body for other organisms. If you imagine you're a fly, right? You're some sort of fly that wants to lay your eggs in the tissues of a carcass. Those eggs then would hatch into little maggots, and they would help eat the tissue and break down the animal. Well, a fly can't tear open the skin to get down to the musculature that its babies are going to want to eat. There's no way for a fly to do that. But a vulture potentially can do that. And so the vulture creates the door, and then other organisms can get in and help break that tissue down. Okay. All right. So if the idea of things like ecological niches and the great distribution of these organisms isn't still enough of a reason to want to study these organisms, another good reason is that birds represent some incredible sexual reproduction strategies, and they give a really good opportunity to study those strategies and how they pay off in nature. So, two examples on far extreme ends would be whooper swans and Eurasian pendulum tits. Whooper swans are monogamous birds. They mate for life. The only exception to this would be um, whooper swans, along with many other birds, do undergo something called divorce. If they have an unsuccessful breeding season, they will sometimes select new mates. But otherwise, they'll stay together forever. On the far other side of this uh, mating strategy thing is this extreme polygamy of a Eurasian pendulum tit. Here, the male will make a nest and leave it like 80% finished and then attract a female. Um, and then the female will help finish the nest. So far, so good. Nothing weird about that. The female helps finish the nest. They mate. The female lays. And then there is an incredibly high probability that one or both individuals will leave the nest to go find new mates. Now, if both individuals leave, the eggs will die. The babies in the eggs are not going to make it, of course. But both the male and the female are capable of brooding the eggs and raising the young. So the gamble here for both the male and the female is if I leave and the other one takes care of the babies, I win, right? Like I got to make babies and I get to go make more babies. And since the male could also play the same role as the female in this process, the female or the male can leave. Either one can leave. And so what happens sometimes is they both leave. They both abandon the nest. Of course, they lose in that situation. And then they continue to do that throughout the breeding season. They can have up to 4 or 5 partners in a breeding season. If you're lucky enough to be the bird that mates and leaves and mates and leaves and mates and leaves and mates and leaves and mates and leaves every single time, and your partner stays every time, you can have a massive number of offspring in one season. If you're the individual that mates one time, stays with the nest, raises those young, you're going to have less offspring than the one that left and kept sleeping around in the bird world. So there's a trade-off. Like if I stay on this nest and raise these young, I have a good chance of having some amount of reproductive success. But if I leave and keep having sex with all these other individuals, I have the potential for much more significant spreading of my genetic information. And so that's the trade-off. And these birds are particularly interesting for studying polygamous reproduction strategies, particularly because both sexes are capable of doing either the raising or the leaving. Yeah, so that's another cool reason that you might study birds. Another thing that is really important to think about that scientists really, I think most scientists really enjoy studying and learning about because these are the things that make animals neat, are their evolutionary morphological adaptations to do the things that they do. And here we have some different examples of that. On the top left, we have a northern gannet. Northern gannets hunt by flying high over the ocean and plunging like a torpedo down through the air into the water at incredible speeds. I think they hit the water, don't quote me on this one, I believe it's something like 60 or 70 miles an hour. If you hit the water at 70 miles an hour, every bone in your body is going to break because you hit the water so fast that there's no chance for surface tension to break, and it's the same thing as throwing yourself into a brick wall. But they can do it with no problem, and there's a couple reasons for that. They have some adaptations that let them do that. Their the respiratory system, the air sacs, are laid out in such a way that they help to cushion the blow to the bird as it hits the water. That's one way they can deal with that. Of course, once they're in the water, they have to deal with something completely different. their nostrils, if you look at most birds, their nostrils are just open holes on the beak, and they would just fill with water. And that's problematic. So if you look at their beaks, you'll see that you don't see visibly open nostrils. And that's because their nostrils are under two little flaps at the base of each side of the beak. And those flaps close. They're designed to close as the bird enters the water, and that keeps water from pouring into their nostrils. On the top right, we have an anhinga. Anhingas, you probably notice right away, other than the fact that it's just a very striking bird of southeastern United States. They have this amazingly long, curved S-shaped neck with many, many vertebrae. And you might notice that at the base here, I don't know if you can see, oh yeah, I have a mouse here. At the base here, you can see this big like S-shaped curve, and then this part of the neck is fairly rigid and straight. This acts like a mechanism where if the straightens out, if the anhinga straightens out this part of the neck, this part of the neck is like a spear tip. And so what they do is they hang low in the water, and they actually will even get under the water completely and swim. And then they shoot that neck out, and they spear fish with their faces. And so if you look at the beak here, you see it's incredibly pointy, and they're able to basically spear fish with their faces. They're pretty amazing to watch in nature. I've gotten to watch them do some of this stuff in Orlando, Florida recently, and it was really cool. Another nickname for those birds is actually snake birds, because when they swim, when they move around on the top of the water, they sit very low. Their bodies are down under the water, and their heads are sticking up for the most part. And so what you just see is this S-shaped object sticking out of the water, and it looks like a snake. Very cool. Bottom left is a barred owl. So barred owls, of course, are nocturnal hunters, like most owls, but not all owls are. And they have a number of adaptations that it specifically makes them good at being a nocturnal hunter. For example, they are able to achieve an incredibly silent flight because of small comb-like structures on the leading edges of some of the major flight feathers, the first couple primary flight feathers. It dampens the sound that comes off the wing as air travels over the wing. They also have ears that are very slightly offset. In other words, they're not horizontally symmetrical on the head. This gives them as additional information on directionality of sound as they fly over a field, or as they're perched up above a field, and helps them locate their prey in the dark. It gives them essentially what you can kind of think of as like 3D sound. If we have a very two-dimensional sound perspective, they have a much more three-dimensional sound perspective. They have more audio information by having slightly offset ears. And then finally, the bird on the bottom right is a truly bizarre creature. This is a Watson, and the Watson is so cool. This is essentially a cow that is a bird, or a bird that is a cow, however you want to think of that. It is externally just looks like a really cool bird. Internally, though, its digestive system is essentially a ruminant digestive system, the same kind of digestive system a cow has, where it has a fermentation chamber that has to help break down the food that the bird is eating. In this case, the bird is eating these leaves on these trees that are low nutritional value and difficult for a normal digestive system to get much nutritional value from. Well, this bird has evolved to deal with that through a ruminant type of gut. Um, and if all of that cool stuff wasn't enough, we can talk a little bit about what birds do for us in a more direct way, right? Some people may not see the value in studying creatures because of all the important roles they play in their environment and their ubiquity and their evolutionary value and their value in understanding reproductive strategies. All of that stuff might not be enough. But most people can understand, hey, birds are directly important to people. Some examples of that. The first here, this is a budgie from Australia. This is a, uh, a, a common pet trade animal. So we keep, some people at least, like to keep birds as pets. And so birds offer companionship to people. The second, and the one I think resonates with the great vast majority of people, is that this bird in the top right, which is of course a wild turkey. And it was only a couple months ago, during my very favorite holiday, Thanksgiving, that we were eating wild turkey. Um, Only it wasn't a wild turkey; it was a very, very not wild turkey. Um, yeah, we eat birds. One of the most abundant protein sources that we eat is chicken. We eat a lot of chicken every year. That's a bird. Bottom left is a Japanese Coturnix quail. And of course, some people do eat quail. Some people eat quail eggs. But what you might not know is that Japanese quail in particular are very important models in experimentation. So just like mice, lots of people know that there are lab mice or lab rats that are used in experiments. Quail are another organism that is used in experiments, particularly these Japanese quail. Um, so we use them to perform scientific experiments to understand how certain substances might affect the body, um, how certain substances might benefit a body or harm a body, or any kind of controlled experiment you could imagine that requires a living test subject. These things could be utilized for. You might not think that's a good thing, but in all reality, the alternatives are worse than not doing that. And then finally, in the bottom right there, you're like, well, that's not a bird. It's a picture. It's a painting of a bird, and it is. We appreciate the aesthetic of birds, and birds have been used in paintings for basically as long as people have been painting. This is a painting from the 17th century, so like the 1600s, of a great titmouse perched on a branch. That's literally what's called, great titmouse perched on a branch. Um, Fantastic name for a painting. And so, but if you look at these historical paintings, you will see birds as a central theme of a painting. You will see birds in the periphery of paintings. You'll see bird themed things like feathers or wings. Birds have been appreciated for their beauty, aesthetic qualities, again, for basically as long as people have been making art. That aesthetic quality, that attractiveness, gives birds something that we call charisma. People like birds. People like to watch birds, right? You don't have to be a scientist to enjoy birds. There are so many bird watchers. Bird watching is one of the most actively engaged in outdoor hobbies of any hobby you can imagine. It's right up there, with like hiking. Um, People love birds. So that charismatic nature is very valuable from a conservation perspective because birds can act as flagship species. That is, the species that can draw people in and make people want to protect some given place. So if there's a place with a bird that needs protection, You can go, look at the pretty bird. We need to protect this place because the pretty bird is there. And people will come and people will donate money to that cause. People will volunteer hours to help do that. People will vote in ways that get, they'll vote for people who have those interests that want to protect those things as well. Um, and that's a big deal when you're talking about conservation. Things like donating money and voting in ways for people that want to achieve conservation are really, really important. Ultimately, what happens is we draw these people in, we get them to protect the place, and then when we protect the place, uh, that bird now acts as a protective umbrella for all of the species that are in that place, right? When you protect the habitat that the bird lives in, every other animal in that same habitat is also protected, which is pretty great. So our bird can be considered in this case both a flagship species and also an umbrella species, a species that ultimately achieves conservation for many more organisms. So these are just a few of the reasons that you might want to study birds. There are many more really interesting examples of the value of studying and understanding birds, but I think this is a good place to stop this discussion. And now what I'd like you to do is go and read the reading for this week. It is about the value of biodiversity, and using that framework along with the discussion we just had, I would like you to develop your own set of ideas about why you think we should study birds. Uh, so it's your personal take on all of this, the value of biodiversity and the ideas presented in this discussion. It is a very important thing to develop a reason for why you do what you do. And this is your chance to start to do that. And then, of course, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I would definitely prefer to be emailed as opposed to like messaged through Canvas. I should get the email notifications, but I have had some problems in the past where someone messaged me on Canvas and I didn't get an email notification, so I didn't see that. So just email me. All right.